and private sector businesses. I'm very excited to be here talking with you guys today about how we can use data to inform our campaigns and inform our outreach to help you guys get the vote you need to win.
Awesome. And like I said in the chat, feel free to pop in with questions throughout this presentation as they come up. I won't be able to get to absolutely all of them, but I'll get to as many as I possibly can. And we'll also hold around 15 minutes towards the end of the presentation to answer questions. But let's dive right into it. Let's talk about sort of the fundamentals of a data-driven campaign. I'd like to tee up first Jared to explore some of the core principles of data-driven campaigning and why is using data so crucial to a campaign's success?
Yeah, and I'm going to quickly share my screen up here as well. We put together some resources for those who might be visual learners like I am. We won't keep it up the screen the whole time in case it distracts the more audio-based people, but I think it's good to have something to look at, distract from my face as much as possible. It's a nice added benefit. So first and foremost, why is voter data important? And for people who maybe have been around campaigns, have spent time talking to candidates, you may have come across the expression of flying blind before, or on the other side, a candidate who knows exactly who their voters are and how to reach them. And those are two sort of sides of the coin. A candidate who has access to data has all of the important information, more often than not, about how to run a really strategic, disciplined, tactical, professional campaign. And candidates on the flip side who lack that data oftentimes are unaware necessarily of who their voters are and how to reach them effectively. And so fundamentally what that voter data is and what is included in, you've heard the expression voter file, if you haven't, we will a lot this evening. These voter files are core strategic assets for campaigns. They include information about entire communities. So if you're running for, let's say, a district office, you'll get the metadata about your district and your community and some of the core demographic and political information of the voters that make up that community. You'll also get information about each individual person. And from that, whether you're talking about partisanship or political leans, or the counts of people based on gender, race, age, all of the sort of core demographic information that helps a candidate understand their district, you can make really important strategic assumptions and also plans around that data. None are more important than understanding ultimately how many people are likely to vote in your upcoming election, and therefore how many votes do you need? That is something that is possible to be done without access to a voter file and voter data, but the information contained within that data really, really helps a candidate understand what they need to do in order to win their election and how to build the coalitions that are required to ultimately achieve your path to victory. Once you have that information, voter data becomes the foundation of, well, how do you actually achieve your path to victory? How do you make sure that you're measuring progress, that you're reaching the right people, that you're understanding if what you're doing is successful throughout the course of a campaign? That can be done at the meta level, again, like talking about messaging and reaching out broadly to voters in your community. And it can also be really, really targeted. And Derek, I know we'll talk a lot more about some of the most micro-targeted ways that you can reach a voter, but there are all of these tactics, whether it's mail, phones, television advertising, digital advertising, social media, down to knocking on doors, that is reliant on this data in order to make sure that a candidate is reaching the right voters that will ultimately turn out and be the folks who hopefully help them have success.
Excellent. So I'm going to tee up a question that I already see in the chat here, and I'm going to aim this one at you, Jared. I'll give the first half of the answer and let you take the second. Has Good Party offered its resources to any of the existing candidates? And by candidates, I mean all, including those such as RFK, who seem like a ripe candidate to take this platform to a gangbusters level. And I'll start and answer the first part. Absolutely, we are offering our tools to all candidates who are able to meet our pledge, which is pretty simple. It is that a candidate is independent, meaning that they're not a member of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. You can be any stripe of independent, any different shade of independent, as long as you're not a part of the two-party system. People powered, meaning that a majority of your funding is coming from people and not from corporations, not from lobbyists, not from big money sources. And then anti-corruption. We ask for a dedication to fairness and competition in elections, as well as transparency when you serve. And we have had hundreds of folks utilizing our tools between last year and between this year. We have put wins on the board. We have elected real people. We had a pretty wonderful day on Tuesday of this week where we had, I think, 17 people. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Jared, win their races and some East Coast races. We mostly focus on state and local level campaigns because those are oftentimes the places where independent candidates have the best chances of running in head-to-head races and avoiding, the dreaded spoiler effect. And it's an opportunity to put wins on the board for the independent movement. Jared, do you want to tap in and talk a little more specifically about why we focus on that state and local level for these data offerings, as well as a direct response? I know you like talking RFK and presidential.
Yeah, I think what I would add is largely a reiteration of what you said, Rob, which is that a principal feature of our democracy, and certainly what we believe a good party, is competitive choices. The more, the better. It's really important, especially in a system where oftentimes candidates only get to choose between one party, given how many races go uncontested. We'll touch on that in a moment. But at best, more often people are forced to make the lesser of two evils choice if they're voting at all. And so whether you're talking about local elections, state legislative elections, federal elections, statewide like gubernatorial elections, all the way up to the White House, I think it's very difficult to argue that more choices, people being able to vote for something as opposed to voting against something, is a feature of a healthy political system. Our focus, and to be clear, there are a lot of different good organizations that want to introduce those competitive choices, whether they're trying to work on changing the rules of our democracy. If you've heard phrases like ranked choice voting introduced, or nonpartisan primaries, term limits, all of those are geared to help reform the system by changing the rules. Our focus is by helping elect good, honest, independent, people-powered, and anti-corruption candidates, and doing it specifically from the ground up by focusing on races like city council, school board elections, where we've seen a ton of success recently in places like Georgia and Texas, and recently in places like West Virginia and New York, where we think that you can build the narrative and build the movement by electing hundreds, if not thousands, of people, versus focusing on really expensive, difficult to win races like US Senate seats, and for sure the presidency is included in that. And so our focus is not on those big ticket races. Our focus really is on this ground up strategy. And our hope is that by doing that, in the not too distant future, we'll be able to support really good candidates who have the wind behind them, rather than running into the storm with the two parties for those big ticket offices when they're ready.
Great. Well, thank you for that. I'll let us get back into the sort of main part of the presentation here. Can you talk a little bit about the way that data can be used to inform decision making and strategy development? How practically do you apply this to making decisions?
It is the driver of decision making. So again, the question is, do you have access to the information that you need by having voter data and voter files around your community? Or are you trying to make assumptions about your community without that information? So one of the first things that we work with on candidates when they opt into this tier of service, which we call Good Party Pro, but even with access to the voter information on our end, when we're trying to learn about these races, is look into these voter tools, these voter data tools, to assess what the path to victory look like for any given candidate. How many people are likely to vote in the upcoming election? How many of them break down across partisan lines? How many Republicans, Democrats, or others? And in many communities, independent voters are a huge plurality, if not a majority, of the registered voters in any given community. And then from there, what coalitions could be built for a specific candidate? For example, if you're someone who served in the military. We can look at a community and say how many veterans are expected to be in that community that could potentially be a base of support for this candidate. If you're young, how do you target young voters? If you're older, what tactics do you need to do in order to engage an older community? All of these core decisions and assumptions and actions that a campaign would want to take and would need to take in order to have success are built on the information that exists in this voter file. So in that way, the voter file and voter data, having access to it, is a hugely important and in fact an imperative asset and resource for any campaign that wants to really run competitively and with the wind at its backs instead of sort of blowing him in the wrong direction.
Excellent. And I know one of the common threads that we tend to hear whenever we talk about independence are there are unique challenges, barriers to access when it comes to almost any resource. This is especially true around data and reliable data for that matter. Can you talk a little bit about what those barriers are and some of the work that we're doing to try to push back against that?
Yeah, it's a huge barrier to entry for independent candidates. And one of the reasons we have on the screen here sort of the two backbones of the political party's data infrastructure, that oftentimes if you run as a Democrat or run as a Republican, you get access to these tools at little to no cost. NGP-Van being the Democratic data platform and GOP Data Center being the Republicans. The parties have spent hundreds of millions of dollars investing in the quality of their data and building infrastructure around it that they make available to candidates. So it's a huge advantage, not just because they're giving you access to information, but also means to execute on those decisions that you'd be making with the data. Whether you're trying to knock on doors, there are door knocking tools that support this information, sending out text messages, phone calls, digital advertising, mailing, all of that sort of exists in this data infrastructure that the parties understand is important. And they've built and invested and continue to invest a whole lot of money in, and then they make available to their candidates. So in the past, we've even heard from really good candidates who were considering running for office that one of the reasons they would choose not to run or to run reluctantly within the parties is because they need access to this data. They understand its importance in order to really run a competitive campaign. And without an independent alternative, they feel like they're running with one hand tied behind their back. And so that really has inspired a good party's decision to make our own investment in this information, to build tools around the data, and then to make it a core product offering for our candidates so that they are not in that position where they're looking around and feeling like they have to do one of three things: run reluctantly as a partisan candidate, not run at all because they don't think they can run competitively without the data, or run, but not without having access to the data, run a campaign that isn't set up for success. We're adding that fourth option, which is for a very low price of $10 a month, have access to the data, talk to people like Derek and myself and Rob, and I see Alex, one of our members of our political team on the call. I'll give him a shout out as well, to be able to use this data and take it as far as it can go.
Yeah. And I had another question here in the chat about is Good Party services, are they targeted to specific locations? And we are servicing candidates nationwide, and we have access to the full national voter file. Jared mentioned that we charge $10 a month for access to it at that pro level. And we do that specifically because we have to. You have to be able to report in your campaign finance reports on your campaign, what you're paying for the voter file. We are giving it away for as close to free as we possibly can. All of our other tools are free tools. The voter file, as well as some of the texting tools that we offer, and some of the voter contact tools that we offer, just by pure campaign finance law, we have to charge. We give it away for as close to free as possible. And as I often joke, luckily there is no law against being bad at business. Let's get into what's actually in the voter file. I want to talk about understanding the data, what's available, what is the type of information that when someone gets the voter file, they can kind of comb through to begin targeting folks, to begin putting their best message in front of the right voters.
Yeah. So what is in the voter file? There's a whole lot. I mean, what we've listed here is sort of the highest and most pressing features in this information that candidates ask us about most frequently. But the long story short is there's a whole lot of information about individual candidates and their communities that are contained in this data. And we work with candidates to identify what points of information are the most useful. Not every campaign is the same. Every candidate runs a little bit differently based on who they are and what they've lived and their life experience and professional experience and just where in the country and what office they're running for. But generally, there's a specific recipe that gets baked into the cake of how do we use this voter file. So first and foremost, you can start really really broadly. You've got access to every registered voter in any specific community. And importantly, you also have numbers, right, behind this information. So how big or how small is your community in terms of registered voters? You can then get deeper, right? You can look at individual cuts of coalitions within your community, whether it's bipartisanship, again, how many Democrats, Republicans, alternative parties, or independent voters exist in your community. What is the age ranges that exist, gender, race, language breakdowns, right? If you're trying to target a community that is predominantly not English speaking and understanding how that coalition can be formed and how big or how small is it. Military service, household sizes, it's really important information. You can put all of that together to understand at an individual level, who makes up and who lives in your community to the extent that you might not already know. And then what are the raw numbers behind that? How many of these individual communities exist? And you can take that information and can turn it into the coalition building that we'll talk about a little bit later. For sure, you get hyper granular data about each individual person in your community. And then most importantly, I think you also can start assessing voter turnout history, right? So not everyone votes on the same schedule. Some people vote very infrequently, if at all. Then there are super voters, folks who reliably turn out in every election, primaries, generals, local elections. And in doing that, you can begin to get targeted on who do you need to reach and in what sort of order of priority to make the contacts that you'll need to make, reach the people you'll need to reach who are going to be participating in an election, or convince them to participate if they don't normally do it. There's a whole lot more that goes into that. Again, you can target by voting precinct, by individual neighborhoods. You can build door knocking lists, which I know Derek will talk about in a few minutes here. And finally, you can look at other behaviors, whether it's consumer behavior. There's a whole lot of models that exist in this voter data. People's other specific behaviors around past actions. Sometimes that gets a little too in the weeds, admittedly. It's fascinating and it's easy to get lost in voter data land. And oftentimes we encourage candidates that it's important to use this information as a guide, not a resource to spend a whole lot of time behind a computer screen. Because if you're not out in the field, you're not reaching people, you're learning about them, but you're not engaging with them. But the long story short, again, is there's a whole lot of information in here. A lot of it is useful to candidates. Then our team is responsible ultimately for helping candidates take this data for its highest and best use.
So another question, does it show if people changed party, i.e. previously registered as Dem or Republican, but now registered as independent or no party?
It definitely does. We can build audiences of folks who have never been registered with a political party, people who've recently changed their political registration, and even people who tend to flip-flop back and forth sometimes within the two-party system. This with the traditional swing voter.
Awesome. I'd like to kind of throw a question Derek's way in this session. What are some effective ways to update and maintain voter data throughout a campaign? And I know this is one near and dear to your heart on the field side.
Yeah, so one of the things about running a data-driven campaign is that as much as you use the data to inform what you're doing, you also need to gather data, right? Collect that data, record that data, store that data in a way that's going to help you inform the actions you take next, right? So there are a lot of different ways to manage data. There are various CRMs that exist out there. If purchasing a CRM is outside of the realm of what your budget will allow for, you can use the voter files that we send over to create what I call typically a voter file dashboard, right? That'll allow you to track and input data that's coming in to your campaign, so that you can use that in sort of the next stages of the campaign. And I'll run through stages of a field campaign a little bit later in the training.
Great. Well, let's move on to talking about some of the tools and technologies that people use for maintaining their data and utilizing their data. And again, this is really important. The voter file itself is a snapshot of a moment in time, right? And from the time that you download it to the time that the election happens, there'll be updates to it, sure, but there'll also be real life events like people moving. There'll be folks who maybe are going to change their party affiliation, right? And the only way that you're going to be able to reflect these real-time changes is if, as you're discovering, oh, I knocked on a wrong door, or I called somebody and I didn't connect with them, actually updating that in your voter file to be able to pull those folks out of your get out the vote universe. That way you're not wasting any resources at the critical last weeks of the campaign where you're trying to get everybody out to the ballot. But please, let's talk through using the data and some of these tactics.
I think Derek, we'll go to you first, right?
Yeah. So yeah, I want to talk about the various ways, and we've sort of touched on it piecemeal throughout here on how to use this data effectively. I'm happy to get into more specifics, guys. I am watching the chat, but so there are a few different ways that we can use the data. I think that really gives a boost to campaigns. I'm, like I said at the top, I'm a Canvas guy. I spent most of my career building and executing Canvas programs for candidates and for ballot initiatives. And there's a reason for that. Study after study after study after study shows that canvassing is the most effective way to reach a voter. It is the best way to make a connection with voters. But it is unfeasible, for instance, for you to knock on every single door in your district in most places, in most races, right? Nor should you have to, right? Ideally, you would not be talking to the people who vote for you no matter what, and you shouldn't be talking to the folks who will never ever vote for you, right? You're sort of looking for that sweet spot in the middle. So using the data to sort of build out your Canvas program or your I'm going to say phone program, whether that be, your traditional pick up a phone, dial a phone number, phone bank, or using one of the texting tools that we have available that you can really sort of get in there and build audiences or universes, guys. I will use those two terms interchangeably. Universe, audience, they mean the same thing, but you want to make sure that when you're employing these tactics, that you are doing it in a way that maximizes your efficiency, allows you to talk to the most amount of voters, and ultimately record their ID so that in that last week of the campaign, that last sort of get out the vote phase of the campaign, that you are talking to people that you know are on your side and giving them the information they need to get out to vote. There we go. Yeah, go ahead. There we go. Yeah. So look, guys, there are a lot of different canvassing apps that exist. Even if you are outside of the sort of two-party system. NGP Van, that is the one that I'm most familiar with. That's siloed off to Democratic Party candidates. That's none of us here on this call, right? But there are other canvassing apps that do exist that you can load your voter data into. eCanvasser is a good one. It's probably one of my my favorites outside of sort of what's offered by the two-party system. Trailblazer is another one that's sort of up and coming. CRB is me. And coming soon, guys, we actually have our own canvassing app that will allow you guys to get out there, talk to your voters, and record that data in a way that's a little bit more native than going in there and adjusting your spreadsheets manually. So
Yeah,
Go ahead.
and the current exports that we're able to provide folks through Good Party Pro do make printing things like walk sheets really easy and really simple. We've been through a couple of beta tests of our door knocking app soon, and we can't wait to get that into everyone's hands as soon as humanly possible. But stay tuned for updates on that. Um, yeah, I think what's next is to talk through texting platforms. Is that right?
Yep. So guys, there are a lot. You do a quick Google search for like a texting platform. There are hundreds of texting platforms. Here at goodparty.org, we use Scale to Win, and there are, I think, a lot of advantages to using Scale to Win through goodparty.org. Scale to Win allows us to create branching scripts, right? That allows us to capture very valuable information and also control the flow of the conversation that we're having through text with the voters. It gives voters multiple options in the way they can respond to the text based on various survey questions. And we can, in turn, sort of have responses to those replies that are preloaded and ready to go on message, on brand for your campaign. We can also add in what are called canned responses, or basically for any questions that end up outside of those survey questions, asking them if they plan to support. We can load up your issue positions right into the system. All this to say, really, Scale to Win sort of offers some of the best flexibility in the market in terms of like collecting the data you need to help your campaign, and sort of gives us the ability to capture that additional information that you might not get with other texting services. So really, sort of the way I like to think about it, like if you're sending out text, you want to do more than just put a message in somebody's inbox, right? You want to be able to gauge the effectiveness of that message by putting in prompts to elicit engagement, right? To me, as someone, I don't know how many texts I've sent out so far this year, like 600,000 texts so far on behalf of candidates. And what I'm always striving for is how do we prompt voters' engagement and stop them from opting out and being removed from that tactic for us, right? And so you do that by sort of targeting your campaigns and your script, the copy, the image, whatever, to the voters that you're trying to reach out to. And Good Party Pro candidates can gain access to that tool, and sort of Good Party staff and volunteer support to really help you set up, monitor, and manage those text banks for basically just the at cost price of the texts. They run anywhere between 2 cents and 5 cents a piece, depending on what type of message you're sending, basically with a picture or without a picture. And if you're interested in getting a text campaign set up, guys, if you are a pro candidate, reach out to your political associate, whomever you have been working with them, talk to them. It takes us about 72 hours to turn around a text bank. So we can spin them up fairly quick. If you're not a pro candidate yet, guys, you can sign up through the goodparty.org platform, sign up for a meeting, talk to a political associate. We'll run you through exactly for how these text banks are managed, set up, monitored, and sort of what services we provide on our end to help you out with that.
Yeah, elevating a little bit of the chat conversation that supports that. Brittany asked, does a candidate have to craft the texting, or do we assist in that process? And as Jared pointed out, our AI tool does a really good job of getting you at least a starting script. And then, we always have that human element to back up the AI work that we do. That script could get you 90% of the way there, and maybe even 100% of the way there. But there are folks like Derek, there are folks like our other political associates who are there to hop on the phone with you and really polish it. And one of the things that I really like about texts, and again, this gets back to like how to use data as effectively as possible, is that you can run super targeted messages. right? So you can look at that voter file and say, all right, this is the message that I want to text out to all of the phone numbers that are available, who are between the ages of 18 to 25, who are college educated. So I'm going to message them about lowering student loan debt. Or I'm going to target the folks who in the voter file are of retirement age, and I'm going to message around policies that affect them more directly in that initial message. So there are all these different ways that you can kind of lean in to getting your best message in front of the right voters. Seniors on a text message campaign maybe is not my strongest example ever, but you get the point. Great. The next area, next channel that you might use data through, we talked about canvassing, we talked about door-to-door and texting, is digital. Being whether it's Facebook ads, whether it is YouTube ads, all these digital platforms represent an advertising opportunity. And increasingly, not every small state and local campaign is going to have a robust digital effort, but almost every campaign has some sort of digital effort. Jared, you've done more of this work. Can you talk a little bit about the digital platforms that folks use to be able to do digital media buying, and also some of the strategy around how to utilize data to make sure that you're getting your message in front of the right voters?
Yeah, I absolutely can. And before I even do, I realize, there are a lot of political candidates and political people on this call. I think it's helpful to refocus specifically on data and tactics, even just define tactics for folks who may have seen us get lost in the sauce a little bit there. And specifically for the purpose of the call, right? Whether we're talking about doors, phones, digital advertising, mail, and some of the other creative elements that exist in campaigns that we haven't even touched on, and we can always talk about individually with candidates who sort of fit what they're looking to do and are looking to experiment with other options. The purpose of data here is to get really refined. And tactics that use data, generally, you're building a one-to-one engagement with a voter, right? And so that's different from, let's say, a lawn sign campaign, or going up on television, which is something that, or printing ads in a newspaper, which is something that is traditionally done. But you don't necessarily know which of your voters are seeing it, if at all, right? You put a lawn sign on a crowded intersection, you have a good estimation that people in your community are going to see it, but you don't know exactly who and exactly how many times they will. And so where this data becomes particularly valuable and potent is that you can be confident that you're reaching the people that you want to be reaching, and only them, by adopting this sort of approach to campaigning. You're being really precise. And so where that comes into play in digital advertising is that historically, and sometimes without data, candidates will do something like advertise on Facebook, or go up on, film a YouTube video and put it up on their using YouTube's or Google's native sort of ad platform. And you can cast a net, and you can say, I only want to advertise if I'm running for city council. And for example, I live in New York City. If I wanted to advertise in New York, I could go up on YouTube or on Facebook and just reach everybody in New York. I have no confidence if I'm hitting the people that I want to be hitting, who might vote for me, and avoiding maybe the people who might be inclined to vote against me. So what you can do now with a lot of these different ad platforms, whether you're using it on platforms like Facebook, or using, or Meta, I guess they're now called, or using specific ad platforms that specialize in this stuff, is you can actually take the voter file and create a coalition of people that you're looking to reach, and then advertise directly to them. So you're producing advertisement on social media platforms, and you are confident that you're engaging the people that you need to reach in order to win your election. And that's maybe a subtle difference, but it's an important one when it comes out to, am I spending my resources as wisely as I possibly can? My favorite element of digital, as someone who fits this demographic, I'm sort of aging myself a little bit, but increasingly young folks who don't have traditional cable subscriptions. All those monies spent on the evening news aren't reaching specifically young people. So there are programs and platforms called connected TV advertising. Increasingly, if you're streaming services like Hulu or Amazon, I don't know if Netflix has bit that bullet yet, But there are people who can advertise directly to people who are streaming on their television or on their computers even. And that's a really powerful tool. It's a way to use a tactic to reach people who maybe you otherwise wouldn't have been able to reach, and do it in a targeted way by taking the voter data and using a platform that can connect with people who are streaming shows that have paid advertising involved and reaching them directly.
Perfect. I want to elevate a couple of questions from the chat here. I want to go back to one about texting before we dive back into the topic at hand. Lynn asked, when is the right time to start texting to voters? Essentially, should it be now? Should she wait until August? Jared and Derek, what do you think about timing, for a texting effort?
Yeah, I think it's really important that you really think about, it's important that we understand who we're talking to, sort of what message we're trying to convey to them, and when is the appropriate time and messenger to get that message across effectively. So I typically I set voter contact campaigns up into several phases: voter ID, voter registration or activation if you live in a community where that's important. If you live in a college town, that's probably a very important thing for you. Voter persuasion, and then get out the vote. So I think if you are starting now with texting for a race in November, I think you can start laying the groundwork to start building the IDs that you need, getting the support scores for voters that's going to allow you to really launch in earnest the sort of voter persuasion piece, going back to those folks who said they were undecided, and maybe if their first contact with us was a text and they were undecided, might be worth having the candidate go and knock on their door and have a conversation and try to earn that vote. But ultimately, everything we're doing is building up towards that last week of the election, get out the vote. So I think if you have a race in November, and then you really want to start gearing up for it and making sure that you have the audience that's going to get you to the win number you need to actually win your seat, that starting early is better than starting late. The effectiveness of text, which I think I also saw down here in the chat, how much does it affect voter turnout, I think is really, really dependent on the type of groundwork you've already laid and how early you've got. If you're reaching out to somebody 2 days before the vote and say, hey, I'm introducing myself, chances are it's too late, right? And that's the sort of an undeniable fact. If they're only learning about you 2 days before the election, your opportunity to win their vote is far slimmer. So I think if you are and text right before mail-in ballot, there are also certain sort of events that are baked into campaigns, right? Like the beginning of, if you're in Nevada right now, right? I know that Nevada is a vote by mail state, that those ballots hit this week. Early voting starts on Saturday. I've got a lot of candidates out in Nevada who are doing vote by mail chase, right? Which we can get that list from the voter file of folks that have requested an absentee ballot or a vote by mail or whatever you happen to call it in your state, to do vote by mail chase. You can get a report after the text bank to show engagement, Marcus. All that stuff is tracked. We track it because there's data behind it, and that's sort of what shows us the effectiveness of the campaign is all the data we get on the tail end of it. So I'm not sure who asked the question about when to start, but now. If you're elections in November, the answer is now.
I'll add to that on texting. On any other tactic that we've discussed or will discuss on future trainings, the thing I remind candidates all the time, and I think it's easy to lose sight of, is that there are two really precious resources that go into campaigning, and they're both finite, and that's time and financial resources. How are you going to fund these tactics? And that means inherently there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to some of these questions, though I understand, and with +1 Derek's urgency, that if you can fund a lot of text campaigns, start as soon as you can. But I think the art of campaigning is really understanding those two things, time and resource and financial resource, and making it work for the campaign. So if you have the resources, or you're talking about, let's say, $1,000 or $2,000 or $10,000 or $50,000 or even more, right? Which tactics you deploy and when are the questions that need to be answered. Some candidates only have the ability to send one rounded text into their community, and that requires some decision making and thoughtfulness. Do you look at using the data? Does my community vote almost a majority, if not almost entirely, before election day via early voting? And if so, when do we start reaching those people? If you start on election day or the day before election day, it's probably too late. Versus other communities, the election day is the big day, and only 10% of the community votes early, which you can figure out in the data. Which means if you reach them 6 weeks before the election, you're probably wasting a bullet in your chamber. So all of these questions, it's something that we help with. We really work with our candidates to come up with the right formula that's specific to the campaign that they're running. We help them identify and come up with the financial plan to be able to fund these tactics. And then we try and think strategically using the data to help our candidates feel really comfortable with the plan that they've laid into place. And then it's just coming down to, can we keep things moving in the right direction? Can we continue to potentially raise the resources required to execute that plan? And can we continue to test and experiment to make sure what we think we're doing is working? And if not, how do we change course to make sure that, again, we're spending our time and our resources as wisely as we can?
Mary asked a related question. What is the statistic on texting that turns voters to actually voting? And field experiments and studies, as I put in the chat, have shown varying results on this, but probably the most commonly cited figure is that it might take between 100 to as many as 200 text messages to generate one additional voter turnout. And on the flip side of that, door knocking, going and actually having a conversation with a voter, it could take anywhere from 14 to 20 conversations to turn a voter out. So it might seem to Jared's point, why would I do anything other than door knocking? Well, the reason that you would is because you don't have the time to get out and talk to every single voter. You don't have the funding. It's so much more expensive and resource intensive to go out door knocking. And when it comes down to it, sending those texts, while less effective overall, you can reach a larger audience for cheaper and in an instant, right? And I would never say do only one or the other, but finding that blend, as Jared said, that lets you talk to as many people as possible at doors and as many people as possible via text. That way it adds up to getting you over your win number. It's sort of the magic of campaigning and a part of what our tools are designed to help folks figure out how to do. I'm looking through the chat here. I'm going to try to collect the questions that remain in the chat that we haven't answered yet, and let Jared wrap up the section that he's in the presentation. And like I said, we have 15 minutes at the end of the call to be able to dive in. But if we, for whatever reason, miss any questions, feel free to pose it again when we get to the Q&A section. But Jared, the mic is yours.
I'm sorry, the question being the mail.
Oh,
right?
sorry. I think you're talking through some more of these real life examples. You just went through the digital platform.
Yeah, sorry. The last common resource that we oftentimes discuss with candidates is traditional direct mail, right? And direct mail is a resource that is still very popular, still very effective. And again, I think the theme of tonight, if we take anything away from it, is that the data is a really foundational piece to help candidates make good decisions about how they spend their time and their resources reaching voters. So mail is an example of a tactic that might cost more per individual contact than a text messaging campaign. And what that means is that candidates who are looking to mail their universe might have to make strategic decisions, right? You might have to send less mail pieces to a smaller but more targeted group of voters who you are confident are going to turn out to vote for you. If you're talking about maybe a campaign that is only spending a certain amount of money on their mail effort. You also are able to use the data to make a very specific decision around who receives the mail, not just based on if they're likely to vote, but maybe you're only reaching folks who are older, who are actively consuming sort of traditional non-digital communications, or are maybe more inclined to take that kind of communication seriously. Mail is a really effective tactic. It's an opportunity for candidates to get right into the hands of voters without having to knock on their doors, which is a pretty laborious and time-intensive activity. And again, like texting, like digital advertising, like phone banking indoors, it's a piece of the equation. And we help our candidates understand, who should they be mailing if they have the budget to do it, how to get the most out of a direct mail program, when they should try and send these pieces out in order to reach voters right when they're voting. I think we were going to get into real world examples. I have a particularly fond one in terms of direct mail, which is just a big piece of a campaign. Is what Derek, you may have heard him say a few moments ago, something called an absentee ballot chase. And absentee balloting is really important. It's a process that has become a lot more commonly adopted since the pandemic, when people weren't going out to vote at the polls. They were opting in to mailing their ballots. And when someone requests an absentee ballot, campaigns can use voter data to send contacts to them right as the ballots are being shipped to their homes from the election agency, whether it's sort of the Secretary of State's office or a county board of election. And on a specific campaign that I had worked on, we knew that each day, roughly 100 people were requesting ballots from their local board of elections. We had a mail campaign set up to go, and all we had to do was basically put the right stamps using we had a mail team that was designed just to do this. And we were shipping out postcards with the candidate's name on it and trying to time it so that the day a candidate, they're going into their mailbox, they get their ballot from the from their board of elections. And right on top of it, literally sitting on top of it, was a postcard from my candidate. So while they're doing their research, they're opening up their ballot, they see the candidate's name in their other hand. And when we were tracking whether or not people were returning those ballots, which you can do with the data, we were seeing and had confidence that those people were casting their ballots for our candidate. And that's a really, it's a powerful way to reach voters exactly when they're about to be going into making that decision to vote.
Oh, that's such a great example. I'd like to move us into talking a bit about strategies for data utilization and the actual targeting in outreach, starting with some discussion on how to use data effectively across different campaign activities. So that real life example is wonderful, but let's talk about how to optimize data for something like door knocking.
Yeah, so typically I would say your door universe's door audience, I'd say they typically tend to be broader than what you'd be texting or reaching out to on the phone. They tend to be made up of universes that sort of cover that first three phases of voter outreach: the voter ID, voter activation, and voter persuasion, and really just sort of allows candidates or your volunteers to maximize the time you have out on doors speaking with voters face to face. Like I said, it is the most effective way. So if we were to just do micro targeted door universes, I'm sure you would find yourself walking 10, 15 minutes between doors. That's how it is up in my home state of Maine anyways. And I think it becomes very unfeasible and unmanageable. So door universes tend to be a little bit denser. They're focused on walkability. And are sort of more focused on candidate to voter interactions. Texting is sort of what I'm going to say the opposite. You can do very broad text, and there is an argument to be made for that. But really, texting allows us to target messages in a way that we just can't do when we go door to door. So as an example of some tactics that we've used in campaigns just over this past month, but if you are running for a school board position or some education related position, you may consider sending a targeted message to voters who are modeled to have school age children, right? And give them a particular message about maybe improving the quality of the schools, while you might send a different message to folks who don't have school age children that might talk about the benefits of your candidacy to their property taxes, right? Or something like that. Two different messages for two different audiences. And we can do that through texting. If you are a veteran, Marcus actually did this to great success. It was one of the highest engagement text banks we've had. But if you're a veteran, you might want to send a message to fellow veterans highlighting your service record. And all of this is possible through the use of the demographic data that lives inside of the voter file. But I mean, I'll just keep hammering this again and again, but the more data we're gathering throughout the campaign, the more you can refine and enhance your voter outreach, or adjust your messaging to be more compelling, right? Because that's one of the things we can find over time is if people are opposed to your messaging or for whatever language are in there, you're sort of able to adapt to that as you take in more information. And again, the ultimate goal to secure enough votes to win election day. So generally speaking, I'd say door universe is broad. Texting, we can get very, very, very micro targets. So.
Yeah, and we're always willing to nerd out on what the best targeting universe for a particular campaign is. And I see here, Robin asks, are the Good Party hats for sale? If you pop into our Discord community, Robin, and you give us your address, we'll send you one for free. We're not trying to sell these, but we would love to see one on anyone who wants them. And there'll be a link to join that Discord community at the end of this call. I want to pivot into talking through some successful data-driven campaigns, give a couple more real-life examples. And I also want to be able to answer, there are a lot of questions about Good Party's offerings in this area because it is one of our core offerings. So I might shift us into some Q&A a little faster than I normally do. But I want to give both Jared and Derek an opportunity to tap in with some, really successful data-driven strategies that they can think through. And then we'll do top level, the overview of Good Party Pro, and then I'll hold out the rest of the time for questions. But on that successful data strategy question, Jared, you're up first. What comes to mind? You're on mute, buddy.
I was going to give Derek the first word just because we have a success story just from our recent work last 2 days ago. It feels like much longer. But specifically around how you blend strategy and data with tactics to have a successful result. So I humbly reserve the right to share my story later, but I'd like to kick it to Derek first to talk about our friend Anthony Gutierrez and what he did on Tuesday.
Yeah, so Anthony Gutierrez, or Councilor-elect Gutierrez, as he's known now, I think is a really good example on how to use data effectively. Just for a little bit of context for you guys, Anthony had run for office a couple times before in the same town of Kennesaw. And the big difference between those two campaigns and what he did this time was a real heavy focus on data-driven tactics. So first off, Anthony used our data to put together walk lists and put together a universe of folks that he could knock on their doors and call them. And he knocked doors all over his city. I'm not sure exactly how many doors he knocked, but if it's not dang near all of them, I would be surprised. And then Anthony also took advantage of our texting program and sent an incredibly effective early vote chase at the beginning of early voting and GOTV reminders to a very targeted audience of likely voters and supporters, using messages that relied fairly heavily on visual content with the text copy relating really just to the actual process of casting a ballot. He was able to drive a much more robust get out the vote program in the last week of his campaign because of that. And I think the results speak for himself. Anthony was the absolute highest vote getter in his race. He did win his race for city council. And really, again, all that to say is that these tools and tactics can help you win your race if you utilize them in the right way.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about Good Party Pro and sort of an introduction into what we offer by way of the voter file that we provide for candidates who are able to take that sort of 3-part pledge that I mentioned. By all means, Jared, I think this is you.
Yeah, so for those who aren't already familiar, Included in our tools are these AI-powered campaign tools that work hand in glove with the Good Party Pro features. But it's important to understand that the core base offering that's free to every candidate who's on our platform is access to these AI resources that can really help candidates run professional campaigns and also enable the tactics that will be powered by the data that we're going to talk about in a moment. What we learned is, it's unsurprising, perhaps, but candidates require access to data to make the highest and best use of those tools and tactics that are existing in our free suite of tools. And so Good Party Pro consists of 3 core features. Again, they're available for a subscription of $10 per month, and it includes access first and foremost to a voter file. Each candidate, is running in their specific cut of the country, and they get access to the voter data that will give them the information they need to understand their community, who lives and makes up that community, and how to best reach them broadly. We've also worked with and trained our AI on how to take the broader voter file and cut it up, working with people like Derek and myself and Alex and Rob to format and get really targeted who you need to reach, generally in coordination, right, with the tactics that you'd be using that data for. So if you live in a large community, I'll give an embarrassing example, speaking back to running a data-driven campaign and maybe a not data-driven campaign. As I live in New York City, talk about testing assumptions. One assumption that was probably obvious is that it's really difficult to knock on doors in apartment buildings. And I didn't have access to voter data many years ago for a scrappy campaign I was running. And it was a really uncomfortable feeling when volunteers were calling me saying, "You gave us doors to knock on. Could you have please specified that these are apartment buildings," which we did have access to in a maybe a lower quality data product. So being able to work with people who have learned from their mistakes, in this case, I have, their mea culpa there, but also being able to take the data and use it to its highest and best use. We can help candidates cut up specific cuts of their community for the specific tactics they would use it for. And in fact, we've trained our AI on how to do it. So rather than spend hours behind a keyboard, we could run voter data through our AI and say, please cut me, the 100 doors that exist within 1 square mile of any candidate's given home if they want to just, lace up their shoes for an afternoon and go knock on doors. We can do that for candidates very easily.
One of the key offerings with Good Party Pro is this at cost texting, and a question that we had coming out of the chat was, someone said, I need to place a text campaign. Who can help me? So I was going to ask Derek, I know this is very much your bread and butter. Let's say that somebody signs up for Pro, they go through that process and they want to turn on a texting campaign. What does that process typically look like?
Yeah, so to get a text campaign spun up for anybody, I essentially need 4 things, right? I need the date and time. You want the text to go out, pretty straightforward. Some sort of copy of what you'd like the text or the image to include. These can be in sort of rough draft format. You can use the AI in the tool. I always put a set of human eyes on that, and I'm willing to work with almost anybody to sort of polish those scripts up and format them for the system. A general breakdown of the audience you would like to send it to, and those can be fairly vague. Chances are I'll hop on a phone call with you and sort of work through exactly who you're trying to reach and why, and figure out what that audience looks like. We'll use that audience we'll plug that in the system, see how many numbers it is. We use that to generate an invoice, and then you pay the invoice and we send out the text. During the sort of text bank itself, staff or volunteers monitor and reply to every incoming response from the text banks. And following the conclusion of the text bank, I would say I monitor them like fairly heavy for like the first 6 hours after a campaign is launched, and sort of spot check it over a day or two. And then typically when they're done, some candidates, they want a full breakdown. Some of them just want the top line numbers. Some of them want to walk through with a whole data dump of every message that was sent in the campaign, and sort of whatever works best for you and your campaign. There's typically some sort of follow-up at the end. I sort of talk about the results, the findings and things like that. If you are running a very large text campaign, with maybe tens of thousands of voters instead of maybe just 1,000 or 2,000 voters, that sometimes that analysis takes a little bit longer in terms of identifying trends. But yeah, those 4 things I need, and I can spin up a text campaign within 3 days.
Great. Well, I'm going to move us into more questions, and feel free to keep chiming in with questions in the chat. We'll try to answer as many as we can over the next 15 minutes or so. One of the questions that popped up in the chat was about digital ad buying. And the question was, how long does it take for political candidates to get approved to send Facebook ads? Here it's a process. I'll answer this one. In my experience, it is process, and it's usually 2 to 3 weeks if there are no delays. So I would at least plan on 2 to 3 weeks. The earlier that you can start this process, the better is the advice that I would give on that. And then another question here from the chat, do we receive a report after a text bank to show engagement? Derek was just speaking to this answer, but absolutely, and we can go as in-depth as literally letting you read every single response to the texts that we got, or we can give you top line. We tend to do this at the sort of direction of the candidates. So that's the answer on that one. Another question, and I'll let Jared or Derek answer this one. How does texting and do not call lists work? Are political campaigns required to follow do not call lists?
The short answer is no. If political speech is protected speech. I've got a really great quote from Justice Hugo Black that's from the case that gave us the right to knock door to door. But which I will read because it's a quote that I've had on the wall of every single office of every single campaign I've ever been on. But the authors of the First Amendment knew that novel and unconventional ideas might disturb the complacent. So they chose to encourage a freedom which they believed essential if vigorous enlightenment was to ever triumph over slothful ignorance. Right? That is the Supreme Court decision that gives us the right as volunteers or as candidates to reach out to folks. They are not subject to the do not call list. Same way if you're canvassing, you are not soliciting, okay? On the flip side of that, I will say, try to convince somebody who said, hey, I'm on the do not call list, don't talk to me, that you're absolutely allowed to do that. I would say never argue with a voter about it. You say, hey, that's all right, thank you for your time. If you don't want to be on the list, reply stop, we'll take you off the list. It's fairly straightforward, but it is protected activities.
Yeah. Jared, does the voter file indicate the likelihood of voting for Biden or Trump?
It's a good question. There are things called voter affinity models. And what those mean is it measures a person's likelihood to be progressive, to conservative, to moderate. And when you combine that with someone's registration, right? Someone is a Democrat and modeled to be a progressive Democrat. You can make the assumption, and they vote infrequently in presidential elections. This would be an assumption that a campaign would have to make. The data would indicate that person's probably likely to pull the Democratic ballot when they go to vote. Similarly, a conservative, highly active Republican voter is probably likely to be a person who pulls a Republican ballot for the presidential nomination. There are some companies, I don't believe our data will have specific candidate behavior. So whether someone's likely to vote for a specific individual candidate in any given election, but it does give you the resources to make informed decisions. Someone who votes a certain way, votes at a certain cadence or frequency, and is registered a certain way, you can put those 3 variables together and draw your own conclusions. But generally the data can talk to you pretty explicitly.
Another, I think, similar question, does the voter detail indicate if a voter has donated to a political campaign before? And I'll say that oftentimes you'll find this in the Democratic Party's version of the voter file, because they have that information that they can update against that voter file. And similarly, the Republican voter file, they're independently managed voter file. They update that information. This is not something that there's a real independent analog for. And because independents are, no monolith, there are progressive independents, there are more conservative independents. This would be a harder and probably less useful piece of information to just sort of like broadly say this person has given to an independent before in the past. It's not something that's built into the default data set that we're providing for folks. And in general, our tools tend to be primed more towards people oriented than anything fundraising enabling.
I'll plus one that, Rob, and just the theme of getting too lost in the data, which I think is something that I've seen plenty of candidates do, and I understand it, right? The intention is to understand your community and how they're going to behave and who you would hopefully represent. But sometimes access to this information can be distracting and even hit a point where it's no longer useful. So in conversations with candidates going back even a couple of days, we've worked with them to really cut very specific terms, like they're between the ages of 19 and 22, and they're registered to vote independent, and they vote in only 1 out of every 4 elections, and they have a cell phone number. You can get that granular, and you take a lot of time to do it, and then you realize you'd be talking to 3 voters out of 10,000 people. And at that point, the data is just so targeted that it's not going to have an impact on your campaign, and you've wasted a lot of time and energy sort of thinking through how to put the rabbit in the hat. And so the advice that I think we oftentimes give candidates is use the data, but use it in a way that's going to hopefully empower the campaign to reach the voters that they need to reach at scale. And if you're spending time cutting tactics and turfs 3 at a time or 10 at a time when you know you need thousands of people to vote, I think we would advise you pretty strongly to broaden out the scope and be a little bit less targeted, as maybe counterintuitive as it sounds, to reach the voters that you need in an efficient and effective way.
Excellent. For door knocking, is it arranged in a good walking order by street, by neighborhood? How does data get recorded after a knock is made?
It's a great question. It's something that we're working with our product team. I've had a couple of meetings even today on the subject, right? And the short answer is that the data is presented in a way that will be useful based on the tactic that you're doing. So if you're sending out call lists, we're not throwing a ton of extra data at you that isn't useful to sending out text messages to a candidate, right? You really just need their name, their cell phone number, and some basic information to confirm that they are within the coalition that you're interested in targeting, whether that's, again, age or voting behavior, whatever. If you're knocking on doors, the practical needs are different. You need, obviously, their home address, and organizing the data efficiently is huge. So we can organize the data so that, for example, you'd only be knocking on a list of odd numbered households, like 1, 3, 5, Green Street, versus 1 Green Street, 2 Green Street, where the data is presented in a way to help candidates walk a straight line, reach the doors that are within their community, and just do it in a way that's as effective and efficient, again, as a candidate on foot can possibly be.
What are some suggestions for running a citywide election in a rather large city? How could you utilize data in the context of running an election in, let's say, New York City, a city near and dear to Jared's heart?
Well, you could definitely use the data to avoid knocking on apartment doors. If you learned anything today, making strategic assumptions about the data can have real practical consequences if you're sending people on foot into certain communities. But in a serious sense, let's say you're running citywide in New York, or even in a city that's less awesome. You can use the data to, again, make informed decisions about how to effectively reach your voters. So for New York in particular, door knocking is not an effective tactic. It's not practical. It's a really good way to get thrown out of an apartment building, which I've had happen to me more than one occasion. So how do you reach voters? It could be by mail. It could be by text messaging or by doing phone banking programs. It could be for younger voters through these digital advertising platforms that exist, or even using the data to reach people in person in a different way. So in lieu of going door to door in New York City, you have to reach people out in the community. And you can do that by identifying sort of a geo turf, right? So if someone lives within a certain neighborhood in Manhattan, you can identify what are the places that are public, whether it's a park, grocery stores are sometimes good for that, making the assumption that people go to their local spots. And if you canvass on the streets, you might bump into the people you need to bump into. Again, less targeted, but a reality of sort of playing the card that you're dealt when you're dealing with maybe an urban environment where door knocking is not a practical tactic for most candidates.
Another question here, are the addresses in your data files geocoded, or do we need to buy that?
So they
Nope.
are geocoded. They each come with latitude and longitude. And typically what we're doing when we're putting together maps and walking lists for candidates is we take that geocoding information. We're going to make that into a KML file, which is a Google Map file. Okay, and you're going to be able to go in there, upload that to your Google Maps, and it will show you. It'll show you your location, right, where you are if you're using Google Maps, and it will also drop pins. You click on the pin, it will tell you the voters' information.
Okay, I've got two last questions from the chat that we can cover here. To reach 250,000 voters in a large area, what strategies would you concentrate on now? And I would say that this is kind of a general answer here. I would focus on almost everything that we talked about on this call, but in different dosages. And we'd have to know a little bit more about the specific jurisdiction to be able to make that call correctly. But in general, what I would develop, I think, for somebody who asked me that, because the answer is going to be different in Portland, Maine, where I live, and in New York City, where Jared lives. Like, I would tell folks to be able to go and knock doors more here in Maine, because that is so much easier. But at the end of the day, you need to be doing digital work. You need to be doing texting. You need to be doing phones. You need to be doing door to door, just in different dosages. And you would be allocating a different level of your budget to those based on where you are. Ultimately, I would try to target as much as 70% of your overall budget towards this type of voter contact work. But when it comes to, how do you reach 250,000 voters across this, I probably lean into the more broadcast efforts in a jurisdiction of that size. So back in napkin, not knowing anything, I would put like 40% into your digital work, and then the rest I would split equally across those more durable forms of voter contact, like talking to people at the doors or on the phone. Another question from Darcy in the chat here that just popped up. Apologies if you've already answered. Do you have lists of podcasts and non-major news channels for possible interviews and press release outlets, and lists of organizations locally to approach for endorsements? I would say for each of these, rather than sort of a centralized list for us, I would pop into ChatGPT with this question and name where you live in that query. So ask Chat to suggest to you, and maybe some basic information about your campaign. What podcasts would be a good fit for featuring you? What are the non-major news outlets that are in your area? And I've even had some success with asking ChatGPT to pull press lists for me, and then going to those websites and pulling the appropriate reporter's name. So that would be my address there. Lynn asks, how important is a good website to have? And this not really a voter file related question, but Jared and Derek, if you want to weigh in on that, I'll tee up the sort of the wrap up for the call on that final question.
Yeah, it's not necessarily voter file specific, but it is related and adjacent. And the reason is because a website is generally where you are directing candidates to learn more, or voters to learn more about a candidate. And it's also importantly how you can measure the success of any specific tactic that you've sent out, right? So we encourage candidates to, it doesn't have to be a crazy website. Good does not mean, 20 pages with 100 policy platforms or 100 policy positions listed out. Really, a compelling website can be boiled down to a few tabs, places where a person can learn about what office you're running for, who you are as an individual and your story and what got you into running, a place that they can take certain actions like volunteer or potentially donate, and also subscribe to an email list. But most of these websites, whether you're signing up through a Wix or Squarespace or many of the other different website platforms that exist out there that can help you build a website at a pretty nominal cost, will enable metrics and tracking. And that's the thing I would double down on, which is if you're sending a text message, for example, or Derek, you hook up with Derek or myself or our team to send a text message using our tools, it's important that your website's included on that text message. And then you can see in real time as people are receiving these messages, if they're checking out your website and what pages they're visiting, and if they're going to the donate page or the volunteer page. And that way you'll be able to measure if a text message was successful and if you should spend resources to do another one, right? Similarly, if you're knocking on doors and you're distributing literature, your website should be on it. You can track if the person that you knocked on is visiting your website too. So it's important to have one. It's important to have those features built in. The website platforms are really helpful and useful, and their customer support teams generally will help you to set up all of this stuff. But without a website, it's very difficult to track the success of the programs that you're putting out into your community.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for spending close to an hour and a half with us on this call. I hope folks learned a little bit about data. We are hoping to see all of you back in 2 weeks. Our next session is on June 6th. We're going to focus on how to recruit, train, and ultimately retain volunteers for your campaign. My colleague Quinn has dropped a link to our Discord. If you have not joined our Discord, please pop in there. We have a candidate-specific channel there. It is where we decide what to do by way of this programming. So it's a way to have some influence on what we do these deep dives into in the future. Also, if you are interested in Good Party Pro, I am dropping the Good Party Pro scheduling link here for you to get in touch with Jared or Derek or anyone else from our team to go deep on our service offerings and get you set up to be able to use this data, to be able to send these text messages. And you should all be getting a follow-up email as well. We are looking, running sort of a referral contest for folks who refer other candidates to goodparty.org. And if you are able to refer a candidate to goodparty.org, you actually get 2,500 free text messages through Good Party Pro. And the candidate you refer gets 5,000 text messages themselves. So kind of a cool way to help someone else and also help yourself. But we will see you all again on June 6th for that volunteer training. Jared, thank you so much. Derek, thank you as always. Any final thoughts before we break from the call?
Not related to text messaging, first and foremost, or data specifically, but thank you all for attending. I want to point out, I see many candidates, people who are actively running for office on this platform. I always think it's really exciting when people are taking time off the campaign trail, who are running from in different parts of the country, who are running for different offices, but who are running for similar reasons, which is to improve their communities and do so in a way that is independent, people powered, and opposing political corruption, which increasingly is just in the news every day. I hope you guys can use these opportunities to connect with each other. Discord is sort of the place that we organize. But I think it's an exciting thing to see independent candidates coming together, being able to learn from each other, taking information from these sessions, hopefully bouncing ideas off of each other. I hope that this is a community that we cultivate where good ideas are shared, lessons are learned, and hopefully every single one of you can have success like Erica, who I think humble brag here, the most votes in your primary. So we're looking forward to supporting you through that. But to everyone who's running, good luck, and hopefully this is a helpful community and resource as we continue to get closer to all of these elections that are coming.
I'll put a big plus one on that. Please hop in the Discord if you haven't already, and support each other. This is a lonely process running for office, and it feels a lot less lonely when we're able to get on calls like this, when we're able to bounce questions off of each other throughout the week in that online space. And certainly we want to know what trainings, what tools, what offerings to build for you, and the Discord is the best place for us to have a direct line of communication with one another. I jumped on you, Derek.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, in closing, guys, if your campaign's a journey, right, your data's the GPS. It tells you where you've been and where you're going. Sign up for the Pro Consult. I already see my calendar filling out. I'm looking forward to talking with a lot of you guys in person over the next couple of weeks and months.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. Have a nice night.
I guess.